Hello, this is Cara Bevan here, talking about Creative Paperclay. I had some questions about how I use paperclay on gourds, so I'm here to show a few examples and explain why I use Creative Paperclay. Um, Gourds are, take to any kind of clay very, very well, and I originally started with paperclay when I started sculpting in 2007. And it's a very easy to use clay. It's very user friendly. Unlike epoxies, which can have allergic reactions and time limits, paper clay you can work on it indefinitely until it starts to dry out. And like a ceramic clay, you have to keep it continually wet, or else it will start to dry and crack. And there is somewhat of a learning curve. They will crack as it starts to dry. You'll see some micro cracks here, and it's a little rough. Generally, when you use Creative Paper Clay as a finishing clay, you want to sand it really smooth, fill in cracks as needed, and make it nice. And you can even carve into it afterwards. It kind of carves a bit like a soft wood, so you can use like any kind of wood carving tools and carve on it really well. But I started to when I was introduced to epoxy sculpt and learned it was a much harder and durable clay. The paper clay transitioned into a base clay because gourds only have so many shapes. And even though this raccoon here has a gourd in the head, you can't really get the muzzle shape as defined as you want it. And ideally, because of the weight of epoxy sculpt, you don't want all of this to be epoxy. It will be incredibly heavy. It, you know, it's harder to edit later. Like, if I wanted to dig out some of the snout here, I can just take a knife and carve it. And with epoxy sculpt, you'd have to use a Dremel. Um, so I use paper clay as my base form. So I'll have a gourd as the base. This one does not have a gourd. This one is actually all wire and paper clay in the center. And then I use epoxy sculpt as a detailing finisher because it takes the details a lot better. Paper clay does shrink as it dries, so you'll automatically get the texture on there that you need to sand off, and it will sometimes distort shapes. So it's not a super good finishing clay unless, you're expecting to do a lot of after carving, sanding, and adjustments later. All brands of paper clay will be different. This brand I have, Creative Paper Clay, it's my preferred one. I've used other kinds that don't shrink as much, have a smoother finish, but how Creative Paper Clay works and how sandable and editable is afterwards has always been a very perk for me. It is more fragile than some of the other clays because it is fibrous in nature. It has a lot of paper fibers in it, and that means it can crack. It's not super strong, but it will do more shredding than chipping like an epoxy will. Epoxy will shatter almost like ceramic. This will more like just shred, and you can easily super glue it back together if something happens. But I use it as a base shape because of the lightweight. And when it dries, it's like paper or cardboard. It's very soft. So I can even use my finger and carve pieces off of it. But it's very soft. It doesn't leave anything on your hands, but it's nice and lightweight. And the tooth of it is just enough so any other clay can stick to it. And epoxy sticks perfectly to it. And as long as you make sure it is completely dry, then you can carve on it just like it's anything else. A piece like this real thinner, might take 3 to 4 days to dry. Thicker sculpts, like there's probably about this much clay in there with a little egg gourd or maybe a little bottle in there, might take up to a week to dry. And you can speed it up in a low temperature oven or on a heating pad if you really need to speed it up. You don't have to bake it. It completely air dries on its own. As soon as the water evaporates, it is hard as can be. But you do have to be careful about re-wetting it. If it's exposed to too much humidity and moisture, it will soften again, and you'll have to wait for it to dry. So you have to be very, very careful about that. And if you do a final sculpture of paper clay like this, if you paint it and seal it in a waterproof sealer, then you should have no problem. I still have my original sculptures from 2007 that I did in paper clay, and they are just fine as long as they're not exposed to weather. And yeah, but it's a wonderful clay. It's really easy to work with. It's really spongy. It does have spring to it. This brand specifically has spring to it, which meaning as you're sculpting with it, and if you want to change shape with it, it will try to go back to its original form a little bit. So you have to really manipulate it. And you have to do like as if you're working with ceramic clay, you got to score it. So it's using water with it also that helps it smooth it to shape. So you literally just place it, smush it, smooth it down, and I can pull it back up. And you can keep adding on top of it as you need to and fill in pieces. So yeah, it's a really good base clay. And I buy it from the manufacturer, Creative Paperclay. They have a wholesale website where you can buy it in pounds or in bulk boxes. I get them in 13-pound bulk boxes, and it's like $92 for a bulk box of 13. And it goes a long way, especially since I mainly do miniatures. When I start using bigger pieces, I can end up using half pounds at a time and like, a little more. But yeah, it as long as you keep it in the package or double bagged and moist, it will save for months. And if you never open that, it's going to be saved for a year or more. So yeah, paper clay is one of my favorite types of clay. I will still use epoxy sculpt for all my main details, and I will go through epoxy sculpt and the differences of other clay in another video. Thank you for watching. Bye!